Right, so as I was saying, these are serious issues, and this tragic killing of this history teacher, I mean, I grieve for him and for his family, and the importance of having a balanced, moderate, liberal education in the deep sense of the word, is that we can see all ways round a problem. And that's what the Jain idea of Anikantavada is, that you don't fixate on one perspective. The poor chap that was killed was the victim of somebody fixating on their own truth. You're not allowed to use sense of humour when applied to our prophet, or you get your head chopped off. I mean, it's a failure of pluridimensionality thinking. It's a failure of multi-perspectival thinking, as John Gebser would say, or Ken Wilber might say. I mean, the problem we're facing really as a planet is how you get profound deep thinking across to the man in the street, the ordinary, not necessarily very well educated person, and how we can use our schools and our colleges to get across the necessary sophistication of thought that we need to survive as a planet. I've spent my life dedicated to that quest ever since starting out as a young man on my philosophical quest, and that's what I'm still pledged to do. But obviously we failed when it comes to this poor history teacher. He's part of the solution, and then he's getting his head chopped off. So my commentary on the Quran is designed to explain the deep background. And I would recommend people to listen to it. I think the last phase of Muhammad's life in Medina is very revealing. The last few surahs, which I've gone into in great detail. In the very last part of his life, he sets out on an expedition to attack the Byzantine Empire at a place called Tabuk, which is up in now northern Saudi Arabia. And he fully expected to engage with Byzantine armies, which were then under the Emperor Heraclius, who had just successfully defeated the Persian Empire. Now, I think this was a mistake. I will say that I think Muhammad's prophetic genius was better employed in his early years when he was a peace lover, a man of non-violence, and was teaching, non-resistance to evil and non-violence. He was more like a Jain Tirthankara in those days. What happened later is that when he went to Medina and got involved with battles and military escapades, I mean, he personally fought in about 8 full-on battles. He was engaged in about 30 other skirmishes and raiding parties, and he organised and coordinated about another 30 skirmishes and raiding parties. Now that's a lot for a prophet. It's not something I personally, as a Druid and a Christian, would advocate, that prophets should get involved in militarism and warfare. It's a muddling up of levels, I think. I think the prophet or sage or seer or druid has to stay above the battle. They can be engaged intellectually, and as you know, I've been very actively opposing Brexit. I'm a general in the Brexit struggle, anti-Brexit struggle. But yeah, I would never advocate violence in any shape or form. It's a failure when you have to stoop that low. No, this work is intellectual work. And that was the case for Christ. Christ was a man of non-violence. He was on a higher plane that never resorted to physical, stuff. So I think Muhammad let the show down in terms of the collective prophethood of humanity, the collective prophetic intelligence, if you want, of all the saints, sages, rishis, seers, druids, enlightened Tirthankaras, Buddhas, yogis, that have all been from all ages, including the Navi, which is the word in the Hamito-Semitic languages of Hebrew and Arabic, and the place called Mari, which is where we found tablets that talk about the Navi. And so, really, the struggle that's going on the planet now is between, can we activate the collective planetary intelligence and wisdom and enlightenment potential, both at all levels, from the elite to the ordinary, down to the local grocery store and the local school. How can we do that for the common welfare, the common well-being? So it's kind of like spiritual communism, if you want. Just as J.D. Bernal and the early communists wanted enlightenment for everybody, but they thought that in terms of that materially. What I'm saying, I'm updating that theory and saying we need to now factor in the transpersonal dimension. Everybody has the right to enlightenment equally, and that means to feel compassion, to feel liberated from fear, to feel liberated from attachment, to feel liberated from neuroses, to feel liberated from mental health issues, and all that stuff. Enlightenment is when you get free of all that. The karma's burned out and you're free. You're a free spirit standing before God, or the ultimate, the great ultimate enlightener. And that is potentially found in all the religions. I mean, that's actually what Muhammad wanted, bless him. And in my commentary on the Quran, I've explained every time Muhammad, really wanted that. He asked people to go on pilgrimage and stand in the plain and say, "Here I am, O God, I bear witness, there is no God but you." And that is a declaration of faith in that ultimate unity behind existence. There is only ultimately one God, but it's the unity that is seen in the perennial tradition of what's called the perennial philosophy by Aldous Huxley. And the Sufis like Fritjof Schuon and René Gaynor, the other great masters, know that Islam is reaffirming that perennial wisdom tradition. That's what Muhammad was really trying to do. Now, why on earth did he think that warfare and battles and armies was the way to get that across? I think he had some issues in the last couple of years of his life. He lost, he didn't lose the plot entirely, but he had a slippage. And I think it happened in the lives of other prophets, other sages. Luther was a great man, a great visionary, a great prophet, but he had this ridiculous anti-Semitism going on. He just couldn't see that the Jews were incredible people, highly intellectual, and that their Qabalistic traditions were amazing. He was a peasant. He couldn't get that. And that tinged German intellectual life, sadly, in that shadow. And his line master, the head of the Augustinian order, Cardinal Egidio, knew he was having Qabalistic texts like the Zohar translated into Latin when Luther was visiting him. So Luther had a blind side. And I don't think there's Abraham did too. We know Abraham was deceitful. He lied several times. We know from the biblical text he lied when he went to Egypt. He lied about other things. He was prepared to sentence his son to death, because he heard voices. We now call that something different. And I don't agree with Kierkegaard as saying that's a great symbol of faith. To me, that's a symbol of something a bit slightly unhinged. If I got voices in my head telling me to kill one of my daughters, please lock me up. And we know that he was also a warrior, Abraham. He went chasing off after people he didn't like in battle. So, Abraham is not also an exemplar of absolute probity. He's deceitful, manipulative, and violent. And Moses likewise. Moses was a murderer. He was also deceitful. And there's a very strong fanatical streak in Moses that is really somewhat unpleasant to read about. He is in the habit of slaughtering people that don't agree with him. And so is he a fantastic moral exemplar for us to follow? Well, no, the point I'm making is he's flawed. He has moments of incredible genius. He's a brilliant... Moses must have been an incredible guy to sit down and discuss the mysteries with. I actually think he was probably much nicer than the biblical text makes it out as. Don't forget the Bible was written possibly even as much as 1,000 years after Moses had lived. If Shimka Jakubowicz is right, and Moses was 1500 BC, and I'm sort of inclined to think that's true at the time of Pharaoh Ahmose, then it's a long time down to when the texts of Moses finally get signed, sealed, and delivered, and the time of Ezra and Nehemiah and so on, and they're written up in exile. in Babylon and finally brought back to Jerusalem. Well, that's not till, about 1,000 years later. So, and I think a lot of the nastiness in Moses is a later superimposition by the yearning of the Jews in exile to really reclaim that land as their own. That was, God gave it to them, and so on and so on. And if you get in the way of that, we're gonna wipe you out, just as Moses did. But I think that's post hoc retrospective projection, most likely, and that's and that Moses probably was not of that variety. I think that more likely is the wisdom that's come down in the Kabbalah is the actual transmission from Moses authentically, orally, and the biblical text was much later. Discuss, But the point I'm making is that no prophet is is without sin, without shortcomings. We all see things through the lens of our own orientation. And the same is true of Buddha and even Mahavira and Rama and Krishna and Jesus. They all have moments which probably they wish they hadn't, done that or said that. I'm not going to go into all the details, but you can read my commentaries and books, and you'll, see, I think, evidence of what I'm saying. And so, therefore, why should Muhammad be any different? I mean, in Islam, Muhammad has not claimed special status. He's not a superhero. He's not omniscient. He's not even enlightened. That's never claimed of Muhammad. All he is a messenger. Now, like all messengers, he can make mistakes. And my argument in the commentary on the Quran is that it is absolutely crystal clear that at times Muhammad coloured the message. Yes, from the angel, from the supernatural realm, the divine download came into him. But it was then transmitted and transmuted through his mind, his conscious and his unconscious mind. And then it was distorted, like when a spoon bends in a glass of water. You put the straight spoon in the water and then you can see, it's weird because the spoon seems to be bent, at a funny angle. I think that's what happens when the divine light comes into the messenger, the prophet. It gets this distortion thing. Now, if you're a seriously well-trained, very good prophet, you don't distort it very much. And I think most of the great seers of history have been like that. I think Muhammad, for 99% of the time, was like that. But there are occasions when the distortion thing happens. And I pointed it out in my commentary because I have a duty to truth, first and foremost. Just as Peter Abelard did in his critical commentary on the Bible. So anyway, this is all on the Green University website if you're interested. And I think I'm going to have to write to the French Minister of Education and offer my Quran commentary as a text for French sixth forms and lycée and universities that, we need to, that work that was begun by Peter the Venerable in Cluny 1,000 years ago, it needs to be finished off. It's not just enough to translate the text. We have to translate the meanings into language that we can comprehend and then translate it back. And that conversation needs to be had. What I'm not prepared to do as an intellectual in Europe is sacrifice the 1,000 years of intellectual history since Peter the Venerable and Peter Abelard started on this quest and allow, crazy people to chop the heads off people because they're teaching rationally. This is a moment of really important history in Europe that we make a stand here and say no, intellectuals have a right to be intellectuals and not have their heads chopped off. And if people want to do that kind of behaviour, then they shouldn't be living here. If you come and live in the Republic of France, there are certain rules you have to play by. If you live in the European Union, there are certain rules you have to accept. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, are absolutely fundamental to the European way. And they've been very, very hard won. The Nazis tried to stop all that with their pathetic racism, and the fascists tried with their sort of megalomaniac, everyone worshipped the Duce kind of thing. But we've struggled to a place where we respect people with their differences, but you can't give freedom of speech to people that are going to misuse it for hate speech and violent inciting. So that is a very finely balanced debate that's going on now in France in intellectual circles and governance, and it needs to happen all over Europe and indeed all over the world. And I would say it needs to happen in Muslim countries above all, because my dear Muslim friends have to realise that their greatest heritage and offering to humanity is actually precisely to have borne the torch of that intellectual approach from the time of the Dark Ages when, in Baghdad, the House of Wisdom was set up, translating Sanskrit, Greek works, and preserving that intellectual heritage, which then enabled the University of Paris to have the texts of Aristotle or Oxford, and enabled Peter Abelard's work to flourish because of their handing on the torch. So true intellectual work is a universal, cosmopolitan, trans-religious activity. It's not anti-religious, as Ibn Rushd, the great Muslim, pointed out. It's speaking to a different kind of veracity level of intensity. What is enacted in the religious rites is a sort of picture language of what is enacted intellectually in the spiritual domain of pure philosophy. And that was what the European Enlightenment tried to articulate, Kant and then Hegel and the whole tradition on down to contemporary philosophical work. So I lament the death of this teacher, and to me it's a symbolic moment in history when we have to take stock and reaffirm our commitment to intellectual freedom as a people, as a continent, and as a republic. I want to move on and say something about the time of year we are in. We're now coming up to this sacred Hindu festival, the Navratri, which is the 9 nights of Durga, the consort of Shiva. Shiva's a deity I've spent a lot of time communing with in India in my trips. As the god of yogis, I've been practicing yoga for many, many years. And Shiva's a very great deity, and his consorts, there are 9 consorts, and we celebrate over these 9 nights, tonight being the second one. Each of them has a duty, a task to perform, to set humanity free from some evil or ignorance. I mean, to be the consort of Shiva is quite a big job, because he is quite a powerful deity. He's the deity of transformation, death, but also liberation and enlightenment. And it's tragic that this teacher should have died, but it's kind of fitting that it happened now, at the time of Shiva. But Shiva is the one that tries to work to purify the poisons. There's so many poisons in the world, including the COVID thing, and including all the lies and disinformation we've had circulating in society. All the wars, all the hatreds, the bomb droppings of Yemen, the hatreds of Iran and Israel, and their propagandizing against each other. Now the hatred of the war in Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh with the Azeri people. These are all poisons that Shiva needs to be able to drink, but he can only do this with the help of his consorts, the 9 who are one. Now it's like the 9 muses in Greek philosophy. To me, Plato's philosophy is very much like Hindu at its best, and the quintessence that Plato calls the One is the synthesis of Shiva, Vishnu and Brahma. So, let's celebrate this time of transformation as we celebrate these 9 nights, and may evil be vanquished on this planet. We can't afford for it to win, folks, because this is a beautiful, amazing world. If you've ever loved anything or anyone, you know it's worth preserving. And I don't want to give time of day to the mad sort of apocalyptical destructivists who want everything to go crashing down. They're the kind of thinkers that are not thinkers. They're anti-intellectuals. They're behind Brexit. They're behind a lot of the destabilisation that's going on the planet. And they're behind a sort of anti-human agenda, an anti-human philosophy, which is anti-philosophical or anti-Sophia. It's Sophia-phobic. So the tragedy of the war in Armenia and Azerbaijan is just another example of what happens when you let the idiots into power. I mean, the poor old Soviet Union used to keep all these forces in check, and I lament the fact that, you know, the USSR wasn't able to stick together in a sort of federation like Gorbachev wanted, of peace-loving people. The Armenians and Azerbaijanis lived for decades in harmony, and there were great Azerbaijanis, great Armenians who contributed to the well-being of the whole republic. And now look at them, they're fighting. The attack seems to have been launched by the Azeris with the collusion of Turkey, possibly some military help from Israel, which I find utterly shocking, but that's what people are saying. And I wouldn't put it past Netanyahu, he is crazy enough. Just a sort of, you know, megalomaniac way of expanding Israeli influence in the Middle East. If so, I think it's absolutely outrageous. Israel's political process should bring him down, rein him in, and make clear that Israel has no military designs on other states in the Middle East. It's not about aggrandizing and causing turbulence. It has to totally change its foreign policy. And it's signing peace treaties with the UAE and Bahrain and things. That's fantastic. But it should also sign them with Armenia and the Azeri state and with Iran. We need a peace treaty between Israel and Iran really, really badly, so that they don't do covert war, secret war, and they acknowledge and respect each other's right to exist. I'd be happy to, work with diplomats on that from the faith perspective, because there are theological blockages as to why that treaty might not happen. But, I can see how it can happen based on years of study of the sacred texts. I'll come back to that theme probably another time, but just to say that we really need a peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We need to solve this problem of Nagorno-Karabakh. I'm working with the World Intellectual Forum as the European coordinator. We have an Armenian coordinator, Gevorg Manoukian, a great man, who is a human rights defender in Armenia, who's a friend of the Prime Minister of Armenia. And these people are, they need to be able to have a peaceful solution. The people of Artsakh should have a referendum. Do they want to be part of Armenia? Do they want to be part of Azerbaijan? Why can't they have a dual citizenship type of thing going? Why can't I, as a member of the Artsakh community, have an Armenian passport and an Azerbaijani passport? Dual citizenship, I think, would be the way to go. I can pay half my taxes to one, half to the other. I'm a great believer in the logic of both and. Conflict arises with the logic of either or, either X or Y, and that leads to violence. Well, the logic of love is about both and. I want to be an Armenian and an Azerbaijani. I actually want to be a global citizen. Thank you very much. And that's a third thing that could be explored with my friends like Professor Glenn Martin and Igor Kondrashin. They have various sort of world governance systems up and running. So you can adopt to become a member of the Universal State of the Earth or the World Parliament, and then you're an Artsakh, Armenian, Azerbaijani global citizen. Well, why not? Let's have the threefold mathematical breakthrough of synthesis that Hegel talked about. And that way we can get peace, and these silly bombs and stuff don't need to fly about and kill people. I mean, it's very, very rude on the poor mothers that bore them and the fathers. It's totally outrageous. As a great lover of life and a lover of, life, I think it's, it's very insulting to Shiva to go and blow up all these bodies. I mean, 500 Armenian soldiers alone have died, let alone how many civilians, and no doubt the same number on the other side. So I'm working on how to resolve it, and anyone that wants to help get involved, please contact me. And this leads me to say that obviously I'm working still on the Brexit nonsense, trying to oppose its simplicity of thinking. It was a mad idea dreamt up by madmen, and the longer we go through with it, the more that's exposed. And yet the drunken crazies that have taken over the British government and cabinet think they're getting away with it. They're not going to get away with it, because karma always comes back on you. And the Queen, bless her, has made a terrible, terrible ethical error in allowing it to go ahead and not speaking out against it. I've been fasting 1 day a week for the last year and a bit against Brexit. I would have hoped the Queen would have joined me. She's supposed to be the willing servant and chief minister of the citizens of her country and her Commonwealth. This Brexit nonsense is utterly opposed to the well-being of her country and her Commonwealth. And she should be fasting 1 day a week alongside me and telling it like it is. If our head of state doesn't tell the truth, what's the point of lavishing all the resources and the splendour and palaces and all the rest of it on them? The one thing that these heads of state have to do is tell the truth. And I hope somebody in her entourage transmits this message, because the time is running out. It's October and Britain is heading for the cliff. And the real important thing that the Queen should be doing is upholding the good news of the kingdom of God that I mentioned in Luke. Now that's good news of the kingdom of God, which is not a human kingdom, it's a divine kingdom. And it's not satanic, evil, disruptive news. No, it's good news. That's all, the head of the church ought to be upholding that good news of the kingdom of God. And politics should be recalibrated to reflect and adjust to that. Brexit is an anti-Christian, anti-European, anti-peace nightmare invented by arms traders and merchants of death and mega capitalists who have no ethics. And all the research shows that, and I've done my research. I know that ordinary decent people, some of my friends, voted for it and support it because they haven't realised what it's actually. It's it's a shadow play done behind the curtain. I've explained what it actually is. I'm also celebrating today New Zealand, which is an intelligent and wonderful democracy under Jacinda Ardern, who friends of mine know. I've corresponded with her. She's one of the few heads of state that actually writes back to you. And bless her, she's a good woman. She's been re-elected as their Prime Minister for the Labour Party. And thank God somebody's got a brain left, So thanks to the people in New Zealand, they've also managed to have a serious policy against COVID and succeeded. And then we come finally to the America, the tragedy that America has become under this man Trump, who is a buffoon and a non-politician. He's an anti-politician. And he, I pray and I hope that the people of America, my dear friends, I have many friends who live in the USA, highly intelligent, amazing people. I think that the collective intelligence of the people of the USA have seen through the Trump nightmare. It was a nightmare engineered by Steve Bannon, who's a very dark force on the planet, who I hope is still in jail and will be sentenced for a very long time, where he can listen to my commentaries in detail. He's responsible for Brexit and Trump, and it comes out of his own paranoid sort of militaristic thinking. He was a soldier. He doesn't understand the logic of both and. He doesn't understand the logic of love. And his types, therefore, thrive on disunity, division, and setting race against race, class against class. And so, the racism that the Trump era stands for, I hope will be voted down very shortly. And that that nightmare will come to an end. Joe Biden strikes me as a very honourable man, old school, Catholic Irish, tell it like it is, don't dress it up, just be honourable and truthful. And I think he'll get a good team around him and his vice president. And I wish them every success. And let's hope that the common sense of the American people prevail. I've been reading a very interesting book, a biography of Roosevelt, who was a great American president, who was responsible for defeating the extreme right in Europe, who were full of conspiracy theories, just like the QAnon people. In fact, the QAnon people are descendants of the kind of Nazi, pseudo-intellectuals who with their anti-Semitism were blaming the other for all the ills of Germany. And it makes a sort of dark sense, this kind of conspiracy theory stuff. And it's been jazzed up and given bells and whistles by the YouTube generation. And a lot of people have fallen down the rabbit hole. But when you read Roosevelt's biography, which I commend, the one I've read is by a man called Tugwell, who was an economist and a friend of his. Roosevelt won the election in America 3 times by being honest with the American people, by being a man of vision and integrity. He was from the upper classes. He was a highly intellectual, well-trained man. He'd been at Harvard, but he could speak, ordinary American. He knew the sufferings of people under the Depression. And he invented and created the New Deal, which gave them hope. And he traveled all over the country, set up projects to give new employment and so on. We need a new Roosevelt to come along and save America from its own corporatist right-wing sector. Now, it's exactly the same people that are against Biden and pro-Trump who were against Roosevelt. They called him every name under the sun. All the insults Trump and his staff were hurling at Biden and Kamala Harris were hurled by the anti-Roosevelt lobby for exactly the same reasons. And most of them wanted to support Hitler. If you read the history of America in the 30s, it's by the skin of its teeth it didn't go down into a fascist dictatorship. And the people around Trump want still to win that argument. They still want to undo everything Roosevelt ever did and to, bring in a sort of fascist, racist hegemony of white supremacy. It's a nightmare. Poor old Roosevelt must be turning in his grave and really sending down angels in floods to help Biden and the decent, ordinary, intelligent, caring, compassionate Americans, So they need to vote with their heart and their intellect, both. And I'm praying that the right, that Trump will have his day. He was a phase. This is a nightmare. Got to see it behind us. And I want to finish my little talk, finally, with something I'm working on, this book on religious mathematics. I may have mentioned it before. I'm doing a sort of update of Newton's Principia Mathematica. I'm very interested in mathematics, and I think religious studies needs to look at how mathematics can help make its own reflections more sophisticated. And vice versa. I think mathematics needs to look more at religion and see how its fundamental axioms, its philosophical content can be enriched by looking at some of the religious and theological debates that have been going on. So that work is going on, and I'm currently looking at the mathematics of enlightenment, for instance. How many people can we get enlightened on this planet? How can we do it? What role can meditation play? Is there a sort of mathematical way of understanding this process of enlightenment? Obviously the chap who chopped the head off the French teacher, he's the kind of guy we need to be reaching mathematically. How many people fanatical like him are there who would rather chop your head off than have a reasoned debate? How many Trump supporters are there like that would rather chop the head off a liberal than actually talk about sensible issues? Sadly, probably quite a few. And so why? What is it that these people are so afraid of? I know it seems to be